On October 22nd, he was in school.
A 14-year-old high school student has been charged with killing a teacher. A terrible, terrible purpose. Shows his hatred for his teacher.
The following stories tell the tale of teenagers truly gone wrong. One day they disliked school, the next day they butchered their teachers. Our first story begins in Danvers, formerly Salem, a suburb of the bustling Boston city. Despite its spooky name, it's a relatively quiet place of 27,000 people, where nothing much happens, except around Halloween 2013. Something truly terrifying was about to go down. Colleen Ritzer was a 24-year-old teacher with big dreams and a huge heart. She was born in May 1989 in Lawrence, Mass. She lived all her life in the same state, moving from town to town for different stages of her education. She graduated from Assumption University in Worcester. Teaching high school math was her dream and her superpower, if you like. She'd always been really good at math, and she wanted to help other teens feel the same way. After all, math can be really fun once you understand it. So after teaching in Stowe for a year, Colleen arrived at Danvers High School in 2012. Her family, as well as her students, described her in the same way: an incredibly supportive person who gave 110% to those around her. As soon as she got to Danvers, her students fell in love with her. She was friendly, dedicated, and her lessons were fun. She had a Twitter account that her students could follow, where she would offer advice and say nice things about day-to-day affairs. As a math teacher, often too excited about the topics she's teaching, to quote her bio, Colleen had amassed almost 2,000 followers, almost all of them students. It's safe to say she was a popular teacher, young, charming, and willing to go to any lengths to make sure her students fulfilled their goals. But as you might have already guessed, Colleen wasn't very popular with everyone in the high school. On October 22nd, 2013, Colleen went to school just like she did every workday, around 8 a.m. She had classes up until around 2, but during her 9th grade algebra class, she noticed one of her students wasn't paying attention.
On October 22nd, he was in school. According to people who were there, other students, he wasn't paying attention in class. And so Ms. Ritzer kept him after school to make sure that he caught up with.
To try to help him.
Colleen was helping 14-year-old Phillip Chism. For Colleen, this was a standard procedure for students who were falling behind. Phillip had just arrived at Danvers High School at the start of the fall semester. He'd moved with his mother from Tennessee after a tough divorce. He was a pretty quiet boy and had little to no friends, but this didn't seem off to anyone. This was normal for a freshman student who had just moved from home. So at 2:30 p.m., Colleen met with Phillip after class to discuss his progress. At 2:54 p.m., Colleen had a bathroom break, but there was a slight issue.
Faculty bathroom was locked. She goes into the second floor student bathroom. He follows her in.
Phillip Chism followed her in. Skip a few hours and it's sunset. Extracurricular activities were done and Colleen wasn't home. She wasn't answering her phone either. Colleen lived with her parents, Tom and Peggy, just outside Danvers. They were a tight-knit bunch and they always kept in contact throughout the day. Peggy and Tom knew their daughter was supposed to come back earlier that day, so pairing that with the radio silence, they knew something was off. Tom drove to school, and the first thing he saw was Colleen's car, untouched. He even kicked the tires to make sure the car was functional. It was. Tom proceeded to ask everyone he could see inside the school if they'd seen his daughter recently. Nobody had, not since daytime classes anyway. Tom then called all of Colleen's friends, hoping that she was out for drinks, but that wasn't the case. So late in the evening, on October 22nd, Tom reported his daughter missing to the Danvers police. While the police investigated the situation, so did someone else. Phillip's mother, Diana, hadn't seen her son for hours. He had soccer practice after school, but he didn't turn up. The coach didn't think to report it, as it wasn't exactly a shock for a student to miss practice every now and then. Diana didn't know he hadn't been at soccer practice, so she was expecting him home quite late. But when it got to around 9 or 10 p.m., she knew something had gone wrong. After all, he was the new kid with no friends, so he wasn't going to be partying somewhere downtown. So Diana reported Phillip missing as well. Before long, the school principal received a phone call from the police. A student and a teacher were missing. Soon enough, people came up to the principal, saying they had seen Phillip and Colleen together after class. The police located Phillip's phone at a local cinema. He'd watched Blue Jasmine at 4:30 p.m. Then, the trace seemingly disappeared. But at the same time, the police were searching for clues throughout the school. To their absolute dread, they found blood smears in the second-floor bathroom, and this was only the tip of the iceberg. In the small forest outside the school, detectives found Colleen's empty purse. A few hours later, they found her body, dumped inside a recycling bin. She was naked from the waist down. She had been strangled, raped, and repeatedly stabbed with a box cutter. Phillip had begun his horrific attack in the student's bathroom, but when he heard a student coming, he quickly stopped. The student left after seeing an exposed butt. Phillip ran off, changed clothes, then came back into the bathroom with a recycling bin. He then wheeled Colleen away into the woods and proceeded to stab her some more. After she died, he violated her with a branch.
And they're charging him with aggravated rape. That's a new development in this case, and there's some very specific language here. They're saying it's aggravated rape because they believe that she suffered really almost mortal bodily injuries, serious injuries during that rape.
Once Colleen was dead, Phillip left a note beside her. It read, "I hate you all." Apparently, he hated his parents' nasty and violent divorce, and he hated having to leave Tennessee. He felt bullied at the new school, and he hated everyone there, especially his nice, friendly, and supportive teacher. Why was she so popular and he wasn't? On 1 a.m. on October 23rd, the police found Phillip Chism walking down the streets of Topsfield, a town around 10 minutes away by car. In his backpack were Colleen's credit cards and underwear. First, he'd said he'd stolen these things from her car, but her car was intact and he had a box cutter with him. Also, his bloody clothes had been found inside a bin at school. He could not get away with this.
A 14-year-old high school student has been charged with killing a teacher in the eastern part of the state.
Phillip Chism was ordered held without bail at his murder arraignment in adult court in Salem today.
Phillip was indicted on charges of robbery, aggravated rape, and armed robbery. He pleaded not guilty.
He claimed that he snapped when Colleen mentioned Tennessee during their conversation, but he had brought 2 sets of fresh clothing, a box cutter, and gloves to school that day. Premeditation was obvious. His defense team also argued that Phillip suffered a psychotic break when he killed his teacher. They added that Colleen surely died in the bathroom before being taken to the woods. While in juvenile court awaiting trial, Phillip attacked a female guard with a sharpened pencil. She followed her into a locker room, strangled her, beat her, and attempted to stick the pencil into her neck. She was saved at the very last minute. As a result of this and of his horrific crime, Chism was tried as an adult.
That Phillip Chism knew right from wrong and could choose right from wrong. He did it repeatedly over the course of that afternoon. He just didn't do it when it mattered. He had a goal. A terrible, terrible purpose.
Phillip was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He will also serve 2 40-year sentences for rape and robbery. This means Phillip Chism will never walk free. Over 1,000 people attended Colleen's funeral. Her death was a blow to the whole city.
I can say that she was a very, very respected, loved teacher. And at 24 years of age, as I said, it's a terrible tragedy for the entire Darren's community.
Colleen's legacy remains one about inspiring young people and never giving up hope. This next story takes us to Fairfield High School in Iowa in the present day. It has 522 students and many teachers who have taught there for decades. A close community full of beloved teachers, including 66-year-old Nohima Graber, Fairfield's Spanish teacher. In 2021, she was one of the most popular teachers in the school, earning praise during the National Teachers Appreciation Week.
Teacher Appreciation Week, Mrs. Graber, thank you for all that you do in and out of the classroom. We really appreciate how much fun we have in your class and how much Spanish we learn, and we just hope you have a really good day. Gracias.
Nohima was not only popular with her students, but a really appreciated colleague. Her dedication to her students truly shined.
She was a classy lady. She was a dedicated lady. She cared deeply about the kids as people.
Nohima had taught Spanish at Fairfield High School for a decade, and she loved every minute of her time. She was 66 years old and had no plans of retiring.
Not all of us liked Spanish 2 or 3. It was a hard class, but she was In reality, probably one of the best teachers we had because she held you to her standards, and that was good for her.
Sadly, the story goes as it always does. Not all her students appreciated Nohema. 16-year-old Willard Noble Jaden Miller and Jeremy Everett Goodale were friends. Despite their royal-sounding names, Jaden and Jeremy were up to no good. They were united in their hatred towards Nohema. Apparently, they hated how they kept getting low grades in her class.
Having known Jaden, having him in my math class, he did speak not in a murderous way, but in a very aggressive way for a dislike towards Miss Graber.
On November 2nd, 2021, a student overheard an argument between the boys and their teacher about trying to get their Spanish grades up. A few hours later, Jaden and Jeremy followed Nohema to Chattawauga Park, where they knew Nohema took strolls every day after school. The boys hit Nohema with an undisclosed object on the head repeatedly. She collapsed and died within minutes. They then tried to conceal her body under a tarp, wheelbarrow, and railroad ties, but their horrific act would not go unnoticed for long. Just hours later, Nohema's family reported her missing to the police. They knew Nohema. She would never be away from home without notice. In the early hours of November 3rd, Nohema's body was found in the park. The news traveled quickly and shook every Fairfield resident to their core. But finding the perpetrators was an easy job for the Iowa police. Jaden and Jeremy's friend told the police to check the boys' Snapchat accounts. Apparently, they had been talking about killing Nohema for a while. They also discussed methods and how to conceal the body afterward. The two boys were quickly arrested and charged with first-degree murder of Nohema Graber. But this didn't bring closure to the people of Fairfield, Nohema's family, or her students.
She was really sweet. She always talked about her family and her friends and how much she loved her kids and how excited she was to come to America to teach us her culture.
Iowa State Education Association President Mike Baranek pointed out the tragedy of a teacher being murdered by a student. The Fairfield students and their families held a vigil for Nohema, letting everyone know that she will never be forgotten and that everyone will be brought closer by this tragedy.
One, that this is not okay, and two, we will stand as a community.
We're each here to support ourselves and each other and the students and the community, and we're all in this together.
Jaden and Jeremy's trial began in early 2022. Jaden's psychologist argued that he's already a different person from the angry boy he was in November last year, as adolescents' brains develop very fast. He argued that Jaden will benefit from being moved to juvenile court so that he can receive treatment and learn to be a better person that could contribute to society in the future. But for the moment, both boys are being tried as adults. They are soon to be 17, and the gruesome details of their murder are simply too horrific to see the killers as kids. As the trial continues, we have yet to find out the sentence for Miller and Everett. Whichever the case, the Fairfield High School community is taking it one day at a time and working hard to spread good words about all the kindness and dedication Nohema brought to their world. This last story takes us all the way to Leeds in the northern UK. In 2014, this was the home of 61-year-old Anne Maguire. She was a devoted teacher and a happy mom. She had been married to her husband, Dawn, for 37 years, and they had two grown-up daughters, one of which is the Royal Ballet soloist, Emma Maguire. Anne had adopted two more children.
She also adopted her sister's two sons, I think back in the 1980s, when unfortunately her sister died.
Everyone who knew Anne spoke of her immense kindness. She had made it her mission to help others in the best way that she could. This also applies to the Corpus Christi School, where she had worked for decades. In the spring of 2014, Anne was helping two classes revise Spanish for their GCSE exams. On April 28th, Anne was stabbed to death by one of her 15-year-old students, Will Kornick.
In the Spanish lesson, he got up from his seat where he'd been working, took out his knife.
Kornick had a 21-centimeter knife hidden in his backpack. He took it out, hid it in his sleeve, and walked over to the classroom where Anne was teaching. Anne was bent over a desk helping one of her students with their work.
She was bent over a desk helping another student. He approached her from behind
and then stabbed her to the back and to the neck on 7 occasions.
Kornick used an extreme amount of force to the extent that he cut Anne's jugular vein as she was running into the hallway to try to save her life.
The savagery of this attack and the calmness on the build-up to stabbing Anne Maguire shows his hatred for his teacher. He was totally calm, and he wanted to enact the most severe pain he could on Anne Maguire. This shows that this was a personal attack. He wanted to cause pain, and nothing was going to stop him.
Anne ran into the hallway screaming for someone to come help her. A colleague rushed to her aid and pushed her into a room. She then blocked the entrance to the room while Kornick was trying to get inside and make sure Anne was dead. When he realized he couldn't enter the room, he calmly returned to his classroom and pulled out a Jack Daniels bottle from his backpack. He wanted to celebrate killing his teacher. But before long, another teacher came into the room, grabbed Kornick, and took him down to the reception, where the police arrested him. Meanwhile, Anne was taken to the hospital and given emergency treatment, but she died within a few hours.
Life.
Anne Maguire, he was given emergency treatment, taken to hospital, but unfortunately I don't think there was very much they could do. The injuries were absolutely terrible. I think the first paramedic on the scene said that they were some of the worst stab injuries that they'd ever seen.
The news spread quickly throughout the school, with students and teachers in utter shock over what they had seen. Why had Will Kornick done this? Everything seemed absurd. Will Kornick was born on June 26, 1998. He grew up with an older brother and a younger stepbrother. When he was 6, his parents split up, but there wasn't any violence or verbal aggression between them.
Will had been brought up in the Leeds area by a family that were a very close family, very loving family, and a very supportive family. There had been a divorce, the parents lived separately, but they were both very responsible people.
Will's parents described him as a calm, loving child who had great relationships with both of his brothers. At school, he had great marks and a 100% attendance rate.
He was a young person who was bright, intellectually able, and in fact had undertaken GCSEs a year earlier than otherwise he would have done.
In 2013, Anne herself had written in Will's report that he was a bright and conscientious student. In fact, there were absolutely zero signs that he would go on to become the first pupil to kill his teacher in the classroom in the UK. He had a few friends at school, and none of them suspected what was going on in his mind.
I was in the same English and maths as Will. He seemed normal. He wasn't my type of person. We had different tastes for things, but he just seemed like another normal kid in my class.
Will could be a bit shy, sometimes keeping to himself and generally not speaking much. But these aren't red flags. They're completely normal ways for a teenager to behave. Being an introvert isn't a crime.
Normally, as a psychologist, when looking at children who murder or commit serious violence, I would expect to see telltale signs. Things such as an unstable environment.
There was absolutely nothing about him that would say to you, there is someone who is dangerous.
The only unhappy moment in Will Kornick's life was in 2013 when he was diagnosed with diabetes. He took this hard, as this meant that he was unable to join the army, which had been his childhood dream. Apparently, he even began self-harming as a reaction to the bad news. Before long, Kornick started taking out his hatred on his teachers, especially on Anne Maguire, who he disliked from the get-go.
Will always said that he didn't like Miss Maguire, but we always thought it was just the normal dislike for a teacher. There was teachers that I didn't like, teachers that other pupils didn't like, but would have never dreamed of doing anything like what Will did.
In November 2013, at a parents' evening at the school, Will refused to see Anne Maguire. She'd taught him Spanish since 2009, and now he was adamant he couldn't even be bothered to talk to her. Then, on Christmas that year, Will texted one of his friends on Facebook saying that he wants to brutally kill Anne. In early 2014, Anne actually sent Will to detention for refusing to do his homework.
A difficult interaction between Will and Anne Maguire in the February, and this seemed to have arisen because he didn't do any homework and then was placed on detention.
This meant that Will was unable to go on a school bowling trip, and this enraged him more than ever. This is what he wrote to a friend on Facebook. The one absolute fuck bitch that deserves more death, more than pain, torture, and more than anything we can understand. Kornick went on the school trip anyway, ignoring his teacher's instruction.
That was almost like public humiliation for him. That, how dare she How dare she tell me not to go? Which he showed that that's what he was feeling, because he then turned up and went on the trip anyway.
Kornick had lost his moral compass and didn't care about doing the right thing anymore. More than that, he was openly defying Anne, which suggests he had even darker thoughts about his teacher.
Further repercussions, and in fact what they called an internal exclusion, which meant he had to work on his own in class for a day because of that.
This was a dark, vicious circle that would end in murder. Anne Maguire was his enemy, and he needed to be the winner.
William Kornick controlled this offence from start to finish. At least over the weekend before, he'd appeared to be entirely normal with his family, did normal things, was laughing and joking, interacting, but all the time he was planning what was to occur on the Monday morning.
After his arrest, Kornick admitted to psychiatrists that he had been planning the murder 4 days prior to April 28th. Apparently, Kornick had also put out a Facebook message to see if any of his friends would murder Anne for him for £10. The weekend before the murder, Will sent clear signs to his schoolmates that he would kill his teacher. In fact, he even bragged about wanting to kill 2 more teachers, one of which was a pregnant woman, but no one believed he was being serious.
The morning that it happened, I asked Will if he wanted to play cards, and he said no. And I said, oh, should we play cards tomorrow then? And Will said, oh, I won't be here tomorrow. And I just thought he was going to pull a sickie from school or just not come in and skive.
On that Monday morning, Will went to his mother's house, took her best knives, a whiskey bottle, and went to school. He was completely honest and even bragged about what he was planning to do. He even showed his classmates his knives, but again, no one believed him.
This isn't something that he had been stewing with himself and plotting internally. He actually made this known to people.
After murdering Anne in front of all his classmates and chasing her into the hallway, Kornick returned to the classroom and pulled out the Jack Daniels bottle from his backpack to celebrate his deed.
Returned to where he'd been sat originally and said to the class, so that they could all hear, good times.
When he was arrested, Will just went over with the cops with a calm poker face. He showed zero remorse or any sign of distress.
I think he asked the first police officer to arrive what their favourite movie was. He was acting in an astonishingly relaxed way.
There's an element of calmness that's chilling about this case.
In fact, Kornick has shown no remorse to this day. He is completely emotionally disconnected from his horrific acts.
I also asked him how the children who'd witnessed this offence must be feeling and how the family of Anne Maguire must be feeling, and generally he made some very derogatory comments saying things like, I couldn't give a shit.
Needless to say, the murder left the school and its community in shambles. People were confused, outraged, and scared that there could be other ruthless killers hiding in plain sight.
The effect on the school and community is kind of obvious in some ways. I mean, the shock's incredible. No school in Britain's really had to cope with anything like that before.
Will Kornick's trial was a simple one, since he had proudly admitted to the killing and bragged about it in front of his schoolmates. His sentence is life in prison with a minimum of 20 years before parole. Meanwhile, the school and Leeds worked hard to make a proper memorial for a woman who dedicated her whole adult life to the Corpus Christi school.
It was after the school said that they were staying open and the pupils were welcome to come and grieve together. The head teacher did an amazing job of looking after us all. Everyone was writing out like prayers on pieces of paper for Miss Maguire and hanging them on the trees in the chapel and things like that.
Anthony McGowan, one of her ex-students and a successful author, said about Anne, in 2017, Anne's family opened an inquiry as to why none of the students alerted the teachers about Kornick's plans. After all, he had bragged about it to many people. Detective Superintendent Nick Wallen, who led the investigation, stressed that it is not on any of the students' shoulders that they didn't believe Kornick at the time. With Kornick behind bars and Anne's family barely recovering from the tragedy, it remains deeply disturbing to hear his stance on his horrific murder.
I know the victim's family will be upset, but I don't care. In my eyes, everything I've done is fine and dandy.
Will there be any closure for Anne's grieving family, or will these words haunt them forever? Thanks for watching, you guys. Hey, don't be shy. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more. Till next time.